We'll be doing the live feed on Citizens Against.
Also, you got a survey that you received as you came in, and at some point we're going to pass the bucket so you can put the survey, and if you borrow the pen, just put it all in there. And that'll be towards the end. And that's for them to have some feedback so that they can just for the cops. Okay, how I got involved with CAST. I was reminded, 2017, Ruth and John Larson, wave hands, where are you? Right there. They came to St. Bridget's in River Falls West Pasture. Ruth had approached me with regards to this issue of CAST, Citizens Against Sex Trafficking. She came to our small group, social justice group, and spoke. And she and John were eloquent. She knew the facts. Long story short, eventually we did have a speaker at St. Bridget's. You were there. Yep, I can't remember. She was there, and I just thought it was just wonderful. But what happens is, and she'll go into all this stuff, is just how deep this whole business is. So, without further ado, welcome Ashley Moore.
Quick testing. Can you all hear me? Okay. Thank you so much, Father Harris, for your introduction, and thank you to each and every one of you for joining us here. My name is Ashley Moore. I'm the Executive Director of CAST, Citizens Against Sex Trafficking. Our office is located in Woodbury, Minnesota, but we serve the entire Twin Cities and western Wisconsin. And I'll dive in a little bit more for introductions here too, but a few kind of housekeeping things. So I know Father Harris mentioned those community surveys. Those are very helpful for us for you to fill out 3 questions at the end of tonight. Help us know what you took away from this. And if there are opportunities, we are always wanting to listen, learn, and grow. So if you have brainstorming ideas, if you have questions that were left unanswered, if you have things that you're like, this is something I need more of, feel free to write it on that piece of paper. If you have a whole paragraph or something, you can write on the back, whatever you need, feel free to just add it all on there. We will read each and every one of those surveys. And so, without further ado, if you were not aware, we are doing Human Trafficking 101 today. And for some of you, this might be the very first time you're hearing about the issue of human trafficking. For others of you, this might be part of your lived experience. Wherever you fall on the spectrum, welcome. Because you have a place here at the table for this conversation. And we want to make sure that you are also okay. So wherever you fall on that spectrum, if something is a little heavy for you, where you need to take a deep breath, where you need to move around and pace in the back, please know you have permission to do that, because I want you to also feel safe and okay. Does that sound fair? Oh, I love it when people are like, all right, great.
Yes.
So it's also nice, too, when you're not like, who is this random human talking at you? So, yes, my name is Ashley. Here's a little bit of my in-field resume. I have been in the field of anti-trafficking for 8, almost 9 years now. And for me, I grew up in the Twin Cities in Woodbury. It was suburban Minnesota between downtown St. Paul and the Wisconsin border. Human trafficking was not something we really talked about. It was something that was an issue that happened over there. Wherever over there was a different country, a different state, it was a downtown Minneapolis-St. Paul issue. It's an urban problem. It's not happening in our suburban community. And so for me, how I got entered into this conversation was through a college class, which, seeing as that's now my entire life calling, feels a little anticlimactic, but that's my story. And that's the story too, where this does not have to be part of your lived experience. You don't have to be a trained social worker. You don't have to be law enforcement in order to make meaningful, beautiful change in our community. So that's an encouragement too, to invite each of you to this table. And so for me, I used to work as a caseworker. I've worked with survivors of human trafficking in Vienna, Austria, Sheffield, England, here in the Twin Cities. I've also worked with law enforcement on freedom flight operations, so their sting operations as they recovered individuals who were in the life. But as I listened time and time again to survivor stories, something that touched me was how everyone got pulled into exploitation and trafficking. And oftentimes, in almost all cases, it started with, I didn't know. I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know that wasn't normal. I didn't know how to leave that party or that sleepover. I didn't know how to stay in that relationship without doing what was asked of me. And it started from I didn't know into forms of trauma and then forms of recovery. So as I listened time again, I wanted to get on the front end. And that is something that I get really excited about for human trafficking prevention, is ending human trafficking before it begins. And that's how I got connected with CAST, which stands for Citizens Against Sex Trafficking. We're a grassroots nonprofit that focuses solely on human trafficking prevention. We want people to know how to protect themselves, their loved ones, and their children before the exploitation begins. And so that's what we're doing here. You're taking the first step in knowing how do I protect those around me and how do I protect myself from this issue. So at CAST, our mission is to empower our community to end sexual exploitation. This is Human Trafficking 101, and I constantly say the word exploitation. And one question I often get is, what's the difference? So when I say exploitation, that is the umbrella term. It means causing harm for gain. So you're causing harm to someone else for gain, whether it's money, power, influence. It's causing harm. It's the umbrella term. So every form of human trafficking is exploitation, but exploitation also covers harassment, abuse, violence, as well as trafficking, and so much more. Does that make sense as well? Okay. And in the anti-trafficking movement, to help us ground the conversation, in anti-trafficking, to end human trafficking, it often starts with prevention, so ending it before it begins. Intervention is often what you see with law enforcement, where they will remove someone from an exploitive situation, or when someone is transitioning out of the life, where they're self-removing from that situation. And then restoration is the healing and recovery process. And that's what we often see when we think of anti-trafficking, is victim services. But the anti-trafficking movement is so much more. So CAST, Citizens Against Sex Trafficking, we focus on human trafficking prevention. So that's a little of the context and the background to why we're here, why we're talking about this, who I am, what CAST is about. And so now we're going to dive into the actual content and the meat of the conversation. So today we're going to be talking about what is human trafficking, the different forms, the signs, and then ways you can potentially respond that are helpful, and then we'll talk about ways to take the next step. So that's going to be about an hour, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Don't you just love a massive screen of words that no one can read because it's too much? So I know this is a lot, but I want to start here because this is from the United Nations. This is the formal definition of human trafficking. So I can read it super quick, where it's the trafficking in persons. It talks about the recruitment, transport, transfer, harboring, receipt of persons, and through a variety of means such as coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, abuse of power, or a position of vulnerability, or giving or receiving payment or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another for the purpose of exploitation. Exploitation meaning harm for gain. Exploitation shall include at a minimum the exploitation of the prostitution of others or other forms of sexual exploitation, forced labor of services, slavery, or practices similar to slavery, servitude, or the removal of organs. That is super long, that's super wordy. What does that mean? We broke it down. And when I say we, I mean people far wiser and smarter than me. I will have a citations list here. Everything we share with you tonight has been peer-reviewed, academically cited, so that these are the root sources of the information. So what human trafficking means? It means three elements: an acts or an actions, a means, and a purpose. It has to have those three elements for it to be considered human trafficking. And for actions, it's got a list here: that recruitment, transport, harboring, or receipt of persons, which means receiving someone. So even like, hey, I'll give them transportation, or I'll let them crash at my house right now while you're waiting for the next flight to come in. That's receiving somebody in your home. That can also be a form. The means, it's got a list here. And then for a purpose, and we'll dive into those purposes in a second a little bit more. But one thing that's unique about Wisconsin, so this is through the United States. This is the nationwide standard. That's the breakdown that you're seeing on the screen. In Wisconsin, what's unique about Wisconsin's definition is that it's this breakdown. For the actions category, it means you can either go through with the action, or if you attempt anything on that list for actions, you can be participating in a human trafficking situation. So that's unique to Wisconsin. Unique to Minnesota is in Minnesota, it doesn't matter what means. It could be anything on this list. It could also be the 632 other means somebody uses. These lists only give a small fraction of what actually takes place. They tend to cover most of it, but there's so many nuances to human trafficking. And so ideally, having these actions by any means for these purposes gives law enforcement more opportunity to take action and hold traffickers accountable. So around the world, especially in Europe, because that's where a lot of my experience is, they consider there's 5 forms of human trafficking. The US focuses mainly on 2 categories, and then they have the subcategories. I like to include the 5 just because I feel like it is helpful context for us. So what the 2 in the United States are include labor trafficking, which is slave labor, and where somebody is forced to do work for minimal to no pay or unreasonable work conditions, working 20 hours a day, and then not receiving enough food, not receiving any funds, different things like that, where they're forced to work. In the United States, the other forms, there's labor trafficking and sex trafficking are the 2 main concepts. Sex trafficking is where you are forcing someone to provide sexual services in exchange for something. And so facilitating that, you are trafficking another person for gain. Domestic servitude is a third type, and that is a form of slave labor, but it focuses in on a home. So I'm from Woodbury, Minnesota, and I have a family friend who's a realtor who ended up selling someone a home that they had a slave living in their home, an individual who was forced to work those 20 hours, locked in the home, was never allowed to leave the home, got to sleep for 4 hours a day, had to take care of all the cooking, the cleaning, the childcare, and finally one day she was able to escape and received help. That's a form of domestic servitude where it's basically an in-house form of slavery. And so that's a form of slave labor, but because it has specific nuances, it tends to have its own category. Then there's criminal exploitation, and so it's where you're forced to conduct criminal acts in order, where someone's saying, like, you have to go and carry the drugs to this person, or you have to go and steal this object, you have to go and do these things, or else there will be severe consequences for you, where someone's forced to do criminal behavior for someone else. That's criminal exploitation. And finally, organ harvesting. And that's removing organs and then having your organs sold on the black market. In the United States, human trafficking, according to the FBI, is reaching epidemic levels. And it's the second largest criminal industry in the United States. They're projecting within the next 20 to 25 years is the generous one. Some studies are showing as quickly as the next 5 years that human trafficking will surpass drug trafficking, and it's already passing arms trafficking, so weapons as well. Human trafficking annually brings in approximately $150 billion a year worldwide. So this is not just the United States, this one's worldwide. And for context, Starbucks globally brings in about 21.5 billion. Apple brings in about 55 billion. And if human trafficking were a country, it would be the 56th wealthiest country out of 195 countries. And so it's bringing in a lot of revenue. And then post-pandemic, we're starting to see information, resources, and statistics about what has happened over the course of the pandemic in the United States. And over the course of the pandemic, child pornography has increased by over 5,000%. And the average age of exposure in the United States to pornography, soft porn, is about 8, with some studies showing as young as 6. And hardcore porn, including violence and kink, on average is being introduced to children around the age of 12, with studies showing around 10. And this isn't just an urban issue. This is happening in suburban communities. This is happening in rural communities. I gave a presentation just north of Ellsworth not that long ago where quite a few students were from a homeschooling community, and they pretty much go from homeschooling, their co-op, and church. And we gave our middle school, high school presentation called Power of Predators, and we asked students, how many of you know someone who was either sent or received a new text message? And over half the students who were homeschooled raised their hand. And so this isn't about a good kid, bad kid situation. This isn't about my child's phone has all the parental apps, they're safe, it's stronger than Fort Knox, no one's getting in. That's fantastic, but what happens when their classmate or their friend shows them something on their phone? So it's something that we want to talk about for internet safety as well. And in our backyard, a few of the little myths and preconceived notions too is, well, how many of you have seen the movie Sound of Freedom? Okay, a few of you. So in that story, it includes an element of kidnapping. And how many of you seen the movie Taken? That's a little further back. Okay, a few of you still. Another film that talks about human trafficking that involves kidnapping. In the United States, the element of kidnapping happens in less than 7% of cases in the US. So what does the other 93% look like? Oftentimes, human trafficking, victims are trafficked from their own home. They go to school, they engage in extracurriculars, and they're exploited either at school, they're exploited in between, or they're exploited when they get home. The most common type of trafficker is romantic partner. The second most common type is family member. And 30 to 40% of traffickers are teenagers in the United States. And so this isn't just the creepy adult lurking in the bushes or stranger danger. It's oftentimes someone they have some relationship with. Also, 42% of youth in the United States have either sent or received a new text message by the age of 14. 1 in 4, so 25% of students have sent or received a new text message by the age of 12. And the age is getting younger and younger and younger as students are getting more and more access to technology and outlets. I had a school just reach out to me this past week saying that they're having problems within their 4th grade class of many of the students are sending out their news to one another, and now they're having trouble with blackmailing and other issues going on. And it's getting younger and younger and younger. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys are sexually abused by the age of 18 in the United States as well. And that number is increasing. We're reaching at an epidemic level, and it's something that we don't see on the surface. And so it can be heavy, and it can be scary, but that's why we're all here, because we want to talk about what do you look for, how do you react, and what are the next steps? How do we protect our children, how do we protect our neighbors, and how do we protect ourselves from exploitation in this world. Predator can be anyone. 93% of the time it's someone the victim knows, 30 to 40% of predators are teenagers, and 30% of predators are family members, which is the second most common type, followed by romantic partner as number one. More often than not, it is someone the victim knows. We host a festival, or we don't host it, we attend a festival called Woodbury Days. I don't know if the local community has their festival. It's like a very mini version of the state fair where everybody has booths, there's carnival rides. We have a booth there to try to spread awareness and invite people into this conversation. We have a trivia wheel there for kids of all ages. We had a 14-year-old boy, not this year, but last year, come up to us and said, I'm so glad you're here, because for several years, and he prefaced this by saying he was okay, law enforcement was involved, his parents knew about it, he's in recovery, but for years in his childhood, he was trafficked in Woodbury by his babysitter. And so it's someone that, it can often be someone that you trust, that is abusing that trust and causing harm for gain. And so we want you to be aware that it's not just stranger danger, that it could be someone close to you. So what are the signs? What are we going to look out for it? So we have physical signs, behavioral signs, and conversational signs. Those are the three categories we'll be discussing. But one thing I like to mention is that not everyone who exhibits these signs is being trafficked. And at the same time, there are those who don't show any of these signs who are being exploited every day. So this is not the end-all, be-all. This is guideposts. And we'll talk a little bit more about what those action steps are if you see those guideposts in a few minutes. All right, so first is the physical signs. First, if somebody is showing extreme fatigue, if somebody is constantly exhibiting physical outward exhaustion, malnourishment, if they're constantly falling asleep in places where it doesn't feel normal for someone to fall asleep, especially if it was something where I used to remember so-and-so used to be so energetic, why are they constantly tired now? If you're seeing some of those physical traits, that could be a sign that something is changing in their external worlds. Also, different signs of healing. So if it's various bruises, especially if bruises are located in places that are easily covered up. So like if you're wearing a long sleeve sweater and it's 96 degrees out, some people are naturally freeze babies. My sister's one of them. It could be 102 and she has a parka on. But other people, that could be an indication and a sign that, hey, they might be covering something up. So if they have different levels and stages of healing, especially in places that are covered up, and if you ask what happened, they give you a vague answer. Like the last time Father Harris invited me, there was a beautiful potted plant, I told you this earlier, and as I'm walking up on the stage, you can tell I'm firmly on the flat ground right now. I totally tripped over the potted plant and was like tumbling and was like, that way. Some people genuinely are clumsy. Some people might use that as a vague excuse. And it's like, oh, what happened? Oh, I tripped. See, I just gave you a very detailed story of how I tripped and how I survived a very harrowing experience. If somebody is giving you a vague answer, that could also be a sign. And some people might, again, it's not the end-all be-all, but that's a red flag to keep an eye out for is, well, what's the story behind it? And if they can't give you, or if they seem reluctant, or they start to pull in, that can also be a red flag to keep an eye out for. Does that all make sense? Okay. All right, and then more physical signs. The key to remember is sudden changes. If you are suddenly seeing a change, especially in income, in accessories, in wealth or material, if you see someone walking around now who all of a sudden has got the new Air Jordan tennis shoes on, if you've got somebody who has got a brand new laptop as well as a Gucci bag or whatever the designer thing is today, if you see these sudden changes, and especially from somebody who you know the relationship with, and you're like, where did that come from? Because I know that wouldn't be something within your family's means, especially if the family's not demonstrating anything, but their child is, and their child's keeping it hidden. Also, if a child has 2 or more phones, that's becoming an ongoing problem. So if you see one with a purple case and all of a sudden you see one with a sparkly blue, you're like, wait, what? Where's the second phone? That one for teachers, if we have any educators in here, that's a big one at school. They often have a second phone for somebody who provided them for private communication. But if you see sudden changes in those material goods or those possessions, could be an indication. Also, if you happen to see tattoos, especially tattoos with a sign of power or wealth associated with this. Again, not the end-all be-all, but it is an indication. Or if you happen to know of any local gangs or community groups where they're trying to build some momentum and steam and they have a specific sigil, whether it's a hawk or an eagle or a panther or whatever it is, and then you have someone's name that isn't the individual's with this symbol, that could be an indication that somebody's trying to brand them. And oftentimes you'll see that in a romantic gesture where it's like, oh, it's my boyfriend's. And it's like, how long have you guys been together? Oh, we've been together 3 weeks. Permanently tattooing your body after knowing somebody for 3 weeks tends to be a strong gesture. That could be an indication that something else is going on, or that that person is trying to say, oh, well, we're going to last forever. We're going to get matching tattoos. Oh, wait, I'm so sorry. I got sunburned. I can't get a tattoo, but you look great, babe. That might be another sign that somebody's trying to manipulate them into branding them or causing that sense of ownership or property. So those are some of the physical signs. And then we're going to be transitioning into a few of the behavioral signs. So missing school often. Again, remember that key term of sudden changes. But missing school often, sudden changes in behavior, if they appear timid, seem fearful, act submissive, if they're avoiding eye contact or kind of turning their body inward like you see the girl in the photo there, or if they seem really shy or nervous. If you're observing these characteristics in somebody and they're trying to protect themselves and kind of close in on themselves to cope, that could be a sign. It's an even stronger sign if it's a sudden change where they used to be so bubbly and outgoing, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, they flipped a switch. What happened? More often than not, people do not rapidly change behavior without a significant reason. So if you're seeing a sudden change in behavior or sudden flip of a personality switch, that could be an indication whether it's human trafficking or another form of exploitation is taking place. And on the flip side of this, if somebody is acting very promiscuously or suddenly discussing brazen topics, if they're acting really boastful about their sexual activity, especially among minors, if they're bragging about their parties, their drug, their alcohol consumption, if they get really excited about those things or think, oh, the more parties you are at, the more credibility and power and influence you have. Also, if somebody is lashing out or seems really angry, or if they overreact in a way that is very disproportionate to the situation. Hey, can you go and just pick up your backpack and bring it to your room? And all of a sudden, it is the biggest tantrum you've ever seen in your life, and it feels very out of the blue. Even for a parent on an everyday basis, okay, what happened today? Whether that's human trafficking or something else, if it's disproportionate to the request, that could be an indication something has happened. If also they're dating someone older, if they have if they're with someone who often appears very possessive or very controlling, or if they're with someone who really has to be hovering, someone who it's like you're trying to engage with a person and it's like so-and-so is always lurking right here, always having a hand on the person, always like, oh, we're together, we're a package set. This isn't just romantic partners too with that possessiveness, it can also be friendships. And that sign of a toxic friendship, and friends can exploit friends. Remember, 30 to 40% of predators are teenagers. It's not only romantic partners or family members that are traffickers. It can be peers, it can be classmates, it can be teammates, it can be people in your youth group. It can also be that peer-to-peer exploitation, and that possessiveness among friendships could be also an indication. Also, if the person in question is constantly deferring to that person in control, so it's like if they constantly, like you ask them a question and they look over to see what the person's reaction is, that can also, or they feel like they can't answer without the other person's permission, or, well, they can say it better than me. That might also be an indication that there might be a power imbalance going on. This kind of transitions us into some of those conversational signs. So if their answers seem really coached or rehearsed, so you ask them a question and it just does not feel organic. If it's something where they're unable to answer basic questions about their living situation, this is particularly relevant for labor trafficking. It can be for all forms of human trafficking, but from talking with experts in specifically labor trafficking, my expertise particularly is in sex trafficking is my areas of expertise, but they say this is a common one. If they provide those vague answers, and even if you dive a little deeper and say like, oh, you're clumsy, oh, well, what happened? Oh, well, I tripped. Oh, really? What happened? Can you paint me a picture? What happened? How did you make it through this very dramatic tripping situation? And even if you just add some life and energy, and if they're shutting that down, that could also be a red flag that something's going on. Does someone spend a lot of time trying to stay for the conversation? So again, that hovering piece, if they're saying like, oh, I'm going to listen in. Especially if you're in a relationship dynamic where it's like, this is a child, like this is my best friend's kid. I've known them for years. We're talking, we're having an inside joke, we're having a moment of just, hey, what's going on? How's this very large pet that you have? I don't know, like whatever that is, you engage in that conversation. This person who has no context, no relationship, is just hovering awkwardly. It could also be an indication, why do they feel the need to always be present when you're conversing with this one person? And if someone tries to speak on behalf of the person, this is also very common if English is not the first language. And so somebody says, oh, well, I'm the translator for that. If they're constantly using that, that could also be that power dynamic and power imbalance where they get to control the narrative. But then they also get to say, oh, well, I'm helping them because I'm translating. That can also be a red flag. And then if they seem really distracted, or if they seem very alert, afraid, or concerned, like, okay, the person isn't hovering, but they're somewhere in the building, or like you're talking to somebody and they're constantly like, looking around like they can't focus on a simple, how are you doing? That could also be an indication that someone is causing concern or that something else is going on. So to recap that piece of it for the signs, the big thing to remember is sudden changes. Normally there's got to be a catalyst for an absolute 180 on somebody's personality. And so what does that look like? So, and for physical, it could be exhaustion, injuries, new items, potentially those tattoos. Behavioral, if they seem all of a sudden very timid, anxious, or fearful, or if they seem on the flip side very aggressive, angry, or very brazen, whether it's brazen through parties or brazen sexually, those can all be indications. And also that relationship dynamic with someone else. Are you seeing a power imbalance between two people? Again, it could be an age difference where it's like, why does this 15-year-old have a 27-year-old boyfriend or girlfriend? Or it could also be, why are these two 14-year-olds, why does this friend feel the need to always speak for her friend, or for his friend, or for their friend? So it's really just inviting into that conversation and being aware of that context. But the other thing I want to encourage you too is go with your gut. I say this to students all the time. Your gut has gotten you this far. If something feels off, go with your gut. Because most of the time, something feels off because something is off. And so we're going to talk about when you have that feeling like, okay, something's not right here, what's going on? What do I do? If you see some of these signs, especially if you see multiple of these signs within someone, okay, well now what? And you hear the phrase, see something, say something, this is who you say it to. So, first and foremost, if you think that there is a crisis or an immediate danger, just call 911 right away. That is a good baseline. If you think there is an emergency, 911. If there's an emergency, dangerous situation, we recommend you do not get in between a perpetrator and a victim, because you could be putting yourself at risk. Also, if you confront an abuser, oftentimes they're not going to punish you, they're going to punish the victim. And so it's when that helping hurts. If you think that there's a dangerous situation, if it is part of that 7% where you think someone's being kidnapped, call 911 right away. Gather as much detail as you can. If you think there's a car involved, get the license plate number, get the size, description, make, or model of the car. Get physical description of the person that you think is involved, both the victim and the perpetrator. Observe, report, support. We'll go through that a little bit more in a second here. But gather those details, but do not interfere yourself, but call 911 for emergencies. If you think you see something and you're like, I feel like I need to take action, it's not an emergency situation, but I'm pretty certain something really is going on here and I need to say something, the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension is a great resource to ask. And then in a minute, I will invite you all to pull out your phone so you can take a screenshot of this. And we'll get into that for a second too, so that way you get all of it in one go. But the contact information for Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, they have an anonymous tip line, so you can provide that as well. If you're in a situation where you're like, I think I see something, I'm not sure if I see something, I don't know if it warrants like an actual tip or report, what do I do? The National Human Trafficking Hotline is a great resource. They have a 24/7 hotline with someone who can process this with you in a way that is helpful. So that is a really fantastic resource. If you're like, I just need to talk it out with somebody who might know more than me, the National Human Trafficking Hotline, great option. And if they're like, yeah, this is something you need to report, they'll give you resources, whether it's the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension or another one that might be custom tailored to wherever you're at. That might be another resource too. But they're kind of that friend where it's like the friend who knows more than you that you need to verbally process with. This is a great resource for that. All right, let me just make sure. Okay, I'm going back. If you want to pull out your phones and take a picture, you are welcome to do so. I also have the Bureau, the BCA, which is Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, their info resource guide at our table as well. So you're welcome to take one of those, but if you want all of these in one go, you're welcome to do that. And when you are done, dramatically pull down your phone so I know that you all got what you needed.
The information will also be on Facebook,
Perfect.
on St. Joe's Facebook page and Our Lady of the Lake's Facebook page.
So Our Lady of the Lake and St. Joseph's Facebook page, this will also be available there as well. Cool. Another way to get connected with these great communities. All right, so what do you do if someone discloses exploitation to you? So again, that umbrella term, so this applies for human trafficking, it can also apply for other forms of exploitation or harm. So if somebody, you're having a conversation, be bold and step into the uncomfortable space. Get comfortable with the uncomfortable. Especially if you're going to talk to your child about this afterwards. It's okay to not have all the answers, and it is okay to feel like, okay, I don't know what I'm doing. Just own it with your kid and say, I want to talk to you about something. I have no clue the best way to do this. So can we have a conversation? It's going to be uncomfortable. Let's go get ice cream to make this a little better. But like, let's talk this out. But if you have a conversation with someone, whether it's your child or a family friend or somebody, if you're a teacher or if you're a youth leader or if you're a coach or if you're a mentor, and someone says, hey, something bad happened to me, what do you do then? Here's a few resources. First, listen carefully to what they say. It is not your job to have all the answers. Sometimes somebody just needs a listening ear. So listen carefully to what they say and don't listen and think, okay, well, how am I going to respond? I hear this one sentence. Just say, I'm going to sit with this, I'm going to listen attentively, and then we'll figure out the rest after. Avoid judgment. This one can be tricky, especially people come from different perspectives. Everyone from this room can fall somewhere on that spectrum where this might be brand new, or I'm a caseworker and I know exactly about this topic, or I'm a survivor, or I'm law enforcement, or I'm whoever you are, you're coming about this from your lived experience, and your story is unique to you. Your thoughts are unique to you. I had one colleague who told me I can share this with the world, so she was like, tell everyone so they don't do what I did. But she had a case where she had a client who was a survivor of human trafficking, and she was exploited by her father. And my colleague, she was like, oh my goodness, you must hate him. And she got chewed out for the next 37 minutes. She was like, you don't know me, you don't know my dad, you don't know my story. I love my dad, he raised me, he grew up with me, we have all these beautiful memories together, what are you talking about? It was much more emotionally charged than that. And she's like, I'll never say it again. Like, it's not your place to project how you feel on someone else. Listen carefully, avoid judgment. Affirm them. So I like to be cheesy because I love a good acronym. So I like to go with OARS, O-A-R-S. Observe, affirm, report, support. Paddle your way to safety. Super cheesy, but very helpful. Observe, listen carefully to what someone says. Affirm. And we'll talk a little bit more about why affirmation is so important in just a minute. But the first thing you should do is not ask a question. First thing you should do is affirm, and we'll talk about why in a minute. Outline your next steps to them. It's a conversation. Be open, be honest. Tell them what the next steps are. From my perspective, you just shared this with me. I'd like to take this with law enforcement. You're a minor, if they are a minor and they're sharing their story. You're a minor, I need to disclose what you shared with me. Oftentimes too, if they're about to share a story and you're like, hey, just as a heads up, if you're about to share something with me that includes exploitation or breaking the law, I feel like I need to report this. If that's not what you want, we need to hash that out first. Be honest. Be upfront. Because if they are like, oh, please don't tell anybody, because it's that sense of fear, of shame, of guilt, or a fear of like, I need to be quiet. It's something where for you, if you're promising, okay, I won't tell anybody, and then you tell somebody, you're breaking trust with them. So say, hey, I want to tell you something, but you can't tell anyone. Be upfront. Say, all right, if it's something where it's breaking the law, or if you've been harmed in someone, we need to keep you safe, I may need to take action on that because your safety is important to me. If that's something you're not cool with, we can talk about that. Otherwise, if it's not that, let me hear it. Spill the tea. Like that's something okay too. But just be open and honest and outline those details to them. If it's a minor especially, report it as quickly as possible because exploitation thrives in silence. It is not your job to be the investigator. It is not your job to be the judge or the jury. Your job is OARS, observe, affirm, report, support. It is not to approach the alleged abuser. It is not to investigate the details. You share what information you have and let the professionals who have been trained to do this in a way that is victim-centered, trauma-informed, do the rest. And you can be there to support along the way and say, hey, this is the next steps I need to take, but I want to come alongside you in this so that you do not feel alone. That's okay too. And do not confront the person, the perpetrator. Again, oftentimes, especially in human trafficking situations, I used to do outreach on Lake Street in Minneapolis, where I'd often see people, I would see traffickers, I would see the people that they were trafficking actively in the life. And it was something where if I tried to confront the trafficker, he's going to be like, okay, suburban girl, you go do you. He's not going to punish me. He's going to punish the victim to ensure that she doesn't get any ideas or that he doesn't get any ideas, because victims can be male or female, just as traffickers can be male or female. They're not going to punish you. They're going to potentially reinforce their trauma bonding with the victim and put them in a harder situation. It can also put them at risk if the perpetrator feels like, I'm about to get caught, I need to hide evidence, or I need to make this go away. It could cause further harm to the victim. So again, fours, affirm, observe, affirm, report, support. It is not your job to get into the middle of an investigation. It is to pass that information along. Does that make sense? Okay. We can talk more about this in Q&A if you have questions on that. All right, so I love a good thought bubble. Here are things not to say. This is somebody discloses to you that they've been part of exploitation or that they've been harmed. Here's what not to say. And before I get into this, if you have said this in the past, this is not shaming. This is an opportunity to listen, learn, and grow. We are all in this together, and we are all wanting to create a beautiful world, so take this moving forward. So what not to say? Did you tell them no or stop? When did this happen? This is a very common question. When did this happen? Where were you when this happened? Were you at a party? Was there alcohol or drugs involved? Let me just follow up with them to hear their side of the story. Are you sure? Just don't. Just don't. Whatever follows that, just no. So are you sure, though, common ones, there wasn't a miscommunication, they were just trying to be funny, they knew you weren't okay with it. These words are really helpful not to say. The reason why is that oftentimes traffickers are counting on you saying one of these items. As community members, when we hear something's wrong, we want to get on the solution side. In order to be helpful and get on the solution side, we have to understand what's going on. So we ask questions because we want to understand, okay, when did this happen? Where did this happen? Who did this happen with? How do I understand this so I can make this better for you? Traffickers are counting on you doing that. Because that is society, that's what we're conditioned to do because we want to help. So if that happens, and a little context too about the trafficker-abuser dynamic, is that they're often looking for that emotional or material need. And it's again, that romantic partner or family member are the two most common types. How they obtain that victim. First, they hide in plain sight. Again, 93% of the time it's someone the victim knows. It could be the babysitter, it could be the romantic partner, family member, it could be the classmate, it could be the coach, it could be the youth leader, it can be anyone. It's somebody you trusted. Oftentimes it's that dynamic. They hide in plain sight. If I told you a predator was in the room right now, would you be able to pick out that one person? No. Because they're human, just like us. Because it's not an us them, it's a we. And so they hide in plain sight. They find out what the victim needs, they befriend them and fulfill that need. When we often think of human trafficking victims, we often think of runaways or people who are marginalized, people who have material vulnerabilities, people dealing with homelessness or drug addiction, which those populations are at high risk for exploitation because of that material need. But what we often do, especially in suburban and rural communities, is we ignore the emotional needs. The person for our middle school, high school presentation, Power of Predators, she is a survivor, and she came from a two-parent household, 6-figure annual income, upper middle class Arizona. She had a comfortable life. She had an emotional vulnerability that someone took advantage of. So when we think, oh, my kid's not at risk, I prefer to use the term at higher risk. And it's at higher risk of those material vulnerabilities. Every one of us has an emotional vulnerability, and that's what traffickers seek out, is how do I fulfill that? And finally, they use manipulation. So step 1 and 2, hide in plain sight, aren't we all? Like, we're all here, right? 2, when we're building out friendships, we find out what are the similarities, what are the interests, what are our common ground, and how do we build on that? Step 1 and 2 often are like healthy relationships. It's step 3 when it's manipulations and converting, where they're putting conditions. I'll stay with you if. I'll do this for you if. I will meet that need if. I will continue to meet that need if. And so they're creating these lies about us for our victims. And they're counting on you to give those questions and those responses. So what traffickers and abusers often say, or the lies that they'll perpetuate, it's your fault, you did something to deserve this. You shouldn't have worn that. You shouldn't have gone to the party. You shouldn't have added me on social media. You shouldn't have X, Y, or Z. If you tell, no one will believe you. This is the reason why affirmation is the number 1 thing to say. Because when you ask a question, they'll ask the question because they don't believe you. So when you say, hey, something happened to me, and the first thing you hear is, when did that happen? Where did that happen? They're asking a question because they don't believe you, just like so-and-so said they would. This is the reason why affirmation, affirm, and we'll get into those specific phrases in a second, is helpful. No one will ever love you if they knew the truth. Another lie is you're making a big deal out of something you should just get over. It happened once. Or it's already happened once, so what's the big deal? Just keep doing it. It's fine. You're going to get into trouble. You are worthless. This is all you're good for. I once had a client who had been in the life, she was transitioning out, and the first day we were going to set up our casework, and they get to pick a color folder, red, green, or purple. And she's like, oh, just pick one. And the way she said it, I was like, oh, you can pick whatever color you want. She was not having it. She's just, pick one, it's fine, it's not a big deal. And I have no idea why I don't repeat it. And I was like, this is your journey. You got to start with the color of your own folder. And she got really upset. Pretty much 45 minutes of our session together was spent on her picking out her color folder and why can't I do this for her? After we built that relationship and trust a couple weeks in, I followed up and said, hey, she just snatched her purple folder. And later I asked her, I was like, hey, why was that such a big deal? And she was like, for years, all I was ever told was I was good to spread my legs. That's all I'm good for. I'm too stupid to pick a color folder. And if that's the message she heard for years, and then all of a sudden I'm telling her to make these big decisions, she has a different message in her head. And so that's why it's important that we go with affirmation. First and foremost, one of the most helpful phrases you can say, I believe you. At the end of the day, it's not your job to be a judge or a jury. It is your job to observe, affirm, report, support. Affirm and support make up half of that message. Because people need that affirmation. If they are told no one will believe you, this is all you're good for, I believe you. Because at the end of the day, it's not your job to determine whether or not they're telling the truth. It is your job to sit with them in that moment. If somebody tells you, I was attacked by an octopus this January on the sidewalk in, Ellsworth, Wisconsin, so sorry that happened to you. Do you want to talk about it? Doesn't matter if that really happened or not. To them, they experienced something that was traumatic to them, and I want to be there for them. And we can deal with the information, and I can pass that on to people who can do the investigation, but in that moment, they need someone to sit with them. So that's what we want to encourage you to do. Other helpful phrases. Thank you for trusting me with your story. You are not entitled to anyone's story. Oftentimes we do this, especially for fundraisers, or where it's like, oh, I want a survivor to come and speak. For us at CAST, we host a survivor story spotlight. The entire 2.5, 3-hour night is dedicated to this person's story. That is the only focus. Because it's their story. And it is a gift when someone gives you their truth. It is not something that's 5 or 10 minutes. It is not something that's passing. You did the right thing by coming forward. This is not your fault. I am here for you. You do not have to face this alone. Oh, I have a phone out. Okay. Perfect. Okay. We got one more phone. I can pull this up in a second too. We've got one last slide, and then we're going to be going into Q&A. So last thing, when I gave that story of constant messages of lies, like for my client being told something for years that was not true about her, what are messages that we can counteract them with? In some psychology studies, they talk about if you say something 10 times to 10 different things to someone, 1 negative, 9 positive, they're going to remember the 1 negative thing. Which means you have to do it 9 times more every single time. I do this with my friends every day. They joke, they call them Ashleyisms. It's not just an Ashleyism, it's just words of affirmation and truth about someone. You matter. Your story matters. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be loved without conditions. You're priceless. Abuse is never the fault of the one abused. It doesn't matter if you asked them out. It doesn't matter if you added them on social media. It doesn't matter what you were wearing. It doesn't matter that you were at a party. That doesn't mean you deserve to be abused. Abuse does not end until you speak up. If you need to talk, I'm here to listen. I will believe you. Because at the end of the day, who cares if it was the octopus in Ellsworth? If you're not okay, I care about your emotional well-being. I want to be here for you. We'll deal with the rest later. These are words of affirmation that can be helpful, but again, keep saying those messages of truth, even if people roll their eyes, even if people chuckle. Embrace it. Create your own insert name isms. I often say with my friends, I hope you find a nugget of joy today. Here's things I care about you and I cherish about you. Because we all matter. So here are some citations too if you're a nerd like me and you like to have the resources. Here's a list of them as well. But before we get into Q&A, 10 more seconds if you want to take the next steps in deepening relationships. 1, if you have a child in your life, we host this twice a year, one in the West Metro, one in the East Metro of the Twin Cities. We're also happy to bring it here if somebody wants to host us. Is Protect Our Youth Workshop, where basically it's a parent workshop. Internet safety. What is exploitation? Sugaring, sexting, sextortion, trafficking. all of the different forms of exploitation that kids are often facing in urban, suburban, and rural communities. And then how do I have a conversation with my child about this? What do I actually say? And how do I say it in a way where we're not both cringing? So that's always a helpful tool too. We also do middle school and high school presentations, so if we have any educators, again, middle school, high school, age appropriate, talking about those different lectures, you can grab brochures on that in the back as well as flyers for this. And if you have resources, at least in Minnesota, I have not found the Wisconsin statistic, but for every dollar spent in Minnesota for human trafficking prevention, saves Minnesota taxpayers $34 in victim services. If you have $1, you can make a $34 impact. Or if that's something you have to give, we also want to invite you to our annual fundraiser. It's Thursday, November 9th. You get to hang out with me, John and Ruth Ann in the back. And there's dinner, silent live auction. You're welcome to participate here too. But even if that's not something you have to give, you have something to give. You've got time. You can volunteer, intern, connect with us. You've got connections. Help us get into schools, into presentations. Our middle school, high school presentation designed to teach students how to protect themselves. And if you have resources, please consider sharing them with us. Because if we can end human trafficking before it begins, then we are protecting children, because we're not just citizens against sex trafficking. We're citizens for freedom. And we're citizens for hope and joy, and we want people to be free, to dream and live life to the absolute fullest. Because each and every one of you, and each and every child, deserves nothing less. All right, that's my spiel. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Ashley. At this time, our ushers are going to go through and pass the hat for a couple of things. Put your surveys in. You borrow a pencil, throw it in there. And also, if you want to donate with cash, just throw it in there. We're going to take everything home. St. Joseph, we sponsored them to come here. We're really honored to do that. If you don't want to do it, that slide right here, if you can get a picture of it, there's brochures, CAST, Citizens Against Sex Trafficking, right on the back. It's there. So it's great. So if you want to just pass that, and if you want ready to check or something, there's also information in a box on the table in the back. This time, questions?
Yep, Q&A.
And I'm the guy with the mic, so.
So feel free to raise your hand, and Father Harris will run around and grab you a microphone, if that's helpful.
It's my exercise for the day. Question?
And also, feel free to fill out the community survey as well, but if you don't have any questions, we'll give some time for people to sit and process. We'll give like a minute, so in case you're like wondering to build it up. But if not, feel free to grab anything and everything in the back and sign up for our newsletter in the back too. We have local, what's happening in the local community and other ways to get involved and participate too there.
I think there's a number of people that didn't get a survey.
If you don't have a survey, can you raise your hand? And then for the wonderful volunteers in the back, can you bring those surveys and a writing utensil to the people with their hand raised? Thank you so much for that.
And if you don't have your survey done right away, don't worry about it when it has a hat. You can put it on a basket on the table in the back too, that's fine.
I have a question.
Okay.
When you said don't.
Closer.
Now I forgot my question. Okay. No, to not say, okay, before you tell me if it has this, or this, I don't want to know. And they turn around and say, I don't want to say anything then, never mind. Yeah. I'm fine.
So instead of saying, I don't want to know, that's a good observation. So question is, if somebody says something and it's like, hey, before you disclose this to me, just know, these are my action steps. You're disclosing that to me so we can work it out.
Thank you.
When I say by work it out, I mean You can use a hypothetical situation. That's often what caseworkers are doing because then they're not legally obligated to report it. But if somebody needs to be heard or validated in that, so you can share it that way, where it's like, hey, hypothetically, if I knew somebody who was being abused and they're not sure what to do, what would they need to do? And it'd be like, first, I'm so glad that they said something, if that was the situation. Or, here's the next steps I would encourage them to do. And I want them to know I'm here for them. They don't have to face this by themselves. I walk through that every step of the way. But if you don't do something, exploitation or harm thrives in silence. Things don't change without you speaking up. So if you hypothetically knew someone who this was happening to, I encourage them to speak up because people want to make sure they're safe because they're worth protecting. So instead of saying, I don't want to hear it, it's saying, hey, if you don't want me to disclose this, maybe let's switch to hypothetical so that I don't feel an obligation where it's like, okay, a child absolutely disclosed something to me and I'm now sitting with it and they're actively being harmed. If they're hypothetical, it kind of alleviates some of that pressure, but then gives them the information they need to sit with as they process that. And you can even follow up later and be like, hey, hypothetically, if we were talking about a hypothetical person who hypothetically had the situation happen to them a couple weeks ago, hypothetically, how would they be doing? It kind of helps you build that rapport and trust as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, it's a question right here.
Is the majority of exploitation mostly the kids and teens, or are older adults as well?
Yeah, great question. So anyone...
And second question, no, finish that first.
Okay, I'll finish the first question first. So is there an age demographic that's higher than others? So youth tend to be a little trafficked higher, or they are entered into exploitation because of that initial vulnerability, but adults absolutely can. One of the fantastic nonprofits in the Twin Cities, one of the previous executive directors, I believe she was 36 when she was pulled into trafficking, and then was in trafficking for 20 years. There's also vulnerabilities with the elderly. And so it's something too with, oh, I'm caring for so-and-so, and so here I'm going to exploit them or allow me to do something to them in order to benefit, like cause harm for gain. So really it can happen across the board. We often see it with children because of the malleability or like the influence children can have. In some ways, you can program for children, for traffickers, they often see that as, oh, well then they don't know anything else, so it's easy to exploit them because this is what they'll be raised with, so that they don't know to ask questions. So does that answer the first question?
Yes.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that human trafficking my mind said they would take somebody and take them overseas or across the border or whatever. I didn't realize that they can do it anywhere. Mm-hmm. I did not realize that, so that's kind of eye-opening.
Thank you for sharing that. I know the trafficking with the kidnapping situation is what we often see in media. People can be trafficked from their own home, and especially with technology, people are trafficked online, where, for example, a child or an adult too, but often children, it's like, oh, send a nude image of yourself to me with a friend that they made online, or a classmate or a friend. They send that image and they're like, oh, you're so beautiful. Okay, well now I want you to have cyber sex with me, or I'm going to send your nudes out to the entire school. Okay, well when a 10-year-old has that happen to them, where they're like, how humiliating would that be if everybody in my world saw my body like that? Okay, I guess I have to have cyber sex with them now. And that's what we do in our middle school, high school presentations, is talk about how do you flip the script so that instead of feeling trapped, you take control in that situation. Which is often too, speaking up and reporting it, so that that person can be held accountable for child pornography or distribution of child porn. It helps, I'm no longer trapped. Hey, you're about to be held accountable for a criminal offense if you send my nudes out to anybody else.
I'm wondering, I've heard people whose children are involved in the social services programs within our counties, maybe foster care and and things like that. And I don't know if it's the social workers or the judicial system, but it's almost as if they overlook all the things that the parent might be doing just to keep the kids in their system, and perhaps the kids don't feel safe anywhere, and therefore they become more vulnerable for this kind of exploitation. I mean, how does your organization work through those kind of obstacles?
So we do the community education and empowerment, so the front end. And so we've done community awareness nights where we have experts come in and talk about different topics of specialty. That has been a request that we're working on and exploring right now, is especially for foster parents, doing a workshop specifically for those in the foster system, those whether they're caseworkers, foster parents, and it's not just for foster parents specifically, that's been our target audience, we've gotten requests for. There's other branches that play into what you're describing. And then researching right now, we're in the process of looking at who knows best answers of how to answer those questions. So we host community awareness nights where we'll bring in experts. Because again, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel, we're trying to celebrate the work that's already being done. And my area of specialty, I mean, I have 8 to 9 years and a master's degree that focuses on sex trafficking, but if somebody has 40 years of working in advocating for foster families, advocating for individual children in the foster system or in higher risk situations like that, they're the people who are going to speak best to that answer. So that's what we would do at CAS specifically. We've done that in the past, and we're looking at when those requests come in. That's why if you have a speaker request, on our brochure or on the Get Involved tab here, if you want us to come talk to a group of friends, or if you have a certain, like, I want a community awareness night on this topic, let us know. That's why filling out those community surveys too are helpful, because we want to bring to you what's actually helpful and relevant to you, instead of assuming what's helpful and relevant to you. I think we had, yeah.
How and how much does peer pressure play in the whole human trafficking arena?
When it's peer-to-peer exploitation, I think peer trafficking, like peer pressure, is often a major issue. There's also, especially in sex trafficking in particular, there is that culture of hypersexualization. There's a glamorized view, if you've heard of OnlyFans, or if you hear of different apps where it's like, oh, well, you're in control and you get to take feet pictures. It's not anything creepy, it's just your feet. Who cares? You have flip-flops on all the time, it's fine. They normalize this, but then they don't talk about the level of stalking, harassment, and verbal abuse people get. And it's like, we'll show your ankles now, we'll show more of you, your body's beautiful. They try to romanticize and glamorize it. So it's part of that cultural sweeping that's happening right now, especially rampant on social media, where it's normalizing and glamorizing the use of these outlets and calling it empowerment instead of entrapment. Because, I mean, I've worked at a spa salon too, and I had coworkers who were joking about, oh yeah, I think I might take feet pictures, that's my second job, or I might take, knee pictures, and I'm like, you're a grown adult, you can do what you want, but because I care about you, Ashleyism, I also want to make sure that, you're aware of the risks. And I shared, like, hey, do you know the level of stalking, harassment, verbal, like talking through that with them? By the end of the conversation, they're like, okay, that's not worth it. So it's like, maybe not. And this is stuff from the FBI as well, where using things like OnlyFans is no longer a gateway into sex trafficking, it's now deemed a form of sex trafficking. And so that's something to consider as well, because again, it's sexualizing and causing harm for gain.
And here we go.
This isn't a question, it's more of a kind of a PS to something that came up earlier. I was talking with I was just shopping at Burnett Dairy this summer, and the kid who was waiting on me, doing cheese demos or whatever, he was in his early 20s, and he just told me that he had posted nude photos on the internet somewhere. And not only is it the embarrassment, like you said, with the young children, but they blackmail them into, now you have to pay me this much money so I don't put it on the web. Oh, now you have to pay me more money. He was in tears. A perfect stranger, talking to a perfect stranger, trapped into giving this, whoever this person was online, more money and more money and more money. And I just thought, this is hideous. It's just absolutely hideous.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. And unfortunately, that's an example of sextortion. So it's extortion with the S in front, so sextortion, where you're blackmailing over sexualized content. And in the United States, it's reaching, the FBI again identified it as epidemic levels. I had a family that shared one of their family friends, so it wasn't in their household, but their son, the family friend's son committed suicide over this. There was also a school teacher who reached out and invited us for Power Predators, said that they had a 6th grader that had to leave the school because of it. I also worked as a college admissions counselor before my journey on here, so right when I graduated and figuring out, like, is this my calling for human trafficking prevention? I was a college admissions counselor, and I had several students where that, I thought it was admissions material, and it was still shots or it was images of their bodies sent by their ex. It's called revenge porn, where it's like you break up and I'm sending all of your nudes to everyone that you want, or that you don't want to see it. And I had one student too, he decided not to go to college, period. It changed his entire trajectory of his life over feeling that sense of humiliation. And even our university offered free counseling, all these resources, but once that damage is done, it's a journey of recovery at that point. And it could take weeks, months, years, decades, or a lifetime to heal from that trauma. And that's why we want to end it before it begins, by helping people understand, how do you take that power back from predators who say, okay, you sent me your nudes, give me more money, or I'm sending it out. Bring that to law enforcement, bring that to the BCA. That person can be charged with distribution of child pornography. If they're not a child, they can be dealt with for extortion. Laws are in progress right now to address the issue of sextortion. Largest sextortion case in U.S. history happened in St. Paul last year, with over 1,100 children victimized in all 50 states, including Wisconsin. And it's a growing epidemic. So that's why we need to end it before it begins, to protect our kids from those situations.
Any other questions?
I do. I'll just.
Yes.
So I'm a teacher and a parent, and as I'm listening and you talking about this all being so normalized, it's so real that it's all so normalized. And I'm wondering if you have some key points to give us for how we can combat the normalization of all of this, because it's challenging on so many levels, and I think as parents we have our own ideas of how we can combat this, but to band together and actually make it happen, because I feel like a lot of us that are trying to diminish the normalization of this are kind of in the minority because it's just everywhere. So if you have any key points or takeaways to give us for that.
Love that. And I love a good action step too. I don't have a good, like, force type phrase for you, but 2 programs, I mean, if you attend the Protect Our Youth Workshop or Power for Predators, if you want to do a deep dive, those 2 deep dives, especially for Power for Predators with students, we're not telling them what they should or shouldn't do. We're telling them, here's what the law says. If you don't want to deal with the fact, like, by law, for every nude image you have of your partner that's under the age of 18 is a $5,000 fine and a 1 to 3 year prison sentence. That's just the law. You could be prosecuted for that. If you don't want to deal with that drama, 3 steps. 1, delete. 2, don't do it again. 3, move on. And kids resonate with that. They're like, wait, I have child porn on my phone? What? No, I don't. Like, if you have a nude image of your partner and they're under 18, you have child porn on your phone. Did you know? For parents, We'll talk about specifics for the Protect Our Youth workshop too with that. But for what, like actual takeaway steps for tonight, do that with your students. Research the details. What does the law state? We're not talking about shaming or blaming. Your body, like when a child sees a sexualized image, their brain produces 4 times the amount of dopamine, which is the happy chemical. Your brain can light up in a very similar way to a shot of heroin. If your kid sees a nude image at the age of 10, if they just took a shot of heroin, would you just say, oh, get over it, it's not a big deal? Their brain's reacting to that. So say, hey, how are you feeling in this moment? Like, let's talk about this, what happened. Create that bonding relationship, but also invite them into the conversation. Hey, what's normal? Have them show you what apps on their phone they love. What is this TikTok? Dancing videos. Should I be making a dancing video? And then you do your awkward interpretive dance, which I'm terrible at dancing. Not a thing for me. But, you know, invite them and they're like, ew, no, mom. Ew, no, dad. Like, create that as a bonding experience instead of a punitive, we're avoiding all the risks. Instead of doing it as what are we walking away from, what are we walking towards? I want to keep you safe. If somebody's blackmailing you, what do? Do situations, like situational drills. If you're at a sleepover and they want to watch something spicy as a movie, what do? If you want to escape that situation while keeping face with your friends so that you don't look like the oddball out, send the X text or send your code word to your parent. Text them in 2 minutes, so you walk away, go to the bathroom, and have your, like as a parent, call them a bunch of times, and then your friends are like, hey, your mom called you like 6 times, what's the deal? Hey mom, what's up? I'm so sorry, something came up, we have to take you home, I know, I'm the worst. Have them blame you, but it gives them an out, where they're like, ugh, my parent's the worst. They get to save face, but then you get to get them out of that situation, no shaming, no questions asked. That's an option if you need to keep your child safe. Take it a step further. How do you empower them to be like, hey, if we see this, what are the risks involved? And have them create their own insert name isms. You know what I mean? Like, what is that thing they can take ownership of? I had one girl after a presentation who's like, people really like to give me hugs, and there's one person who gives me hugs for too long and it makes me uncomfortable. I don't like hugs to begin with, but I don't know what to say because I'm the new kid and I don't want to seem like the oddball out. I'm like, okay, let's practice a couple phrases. What's a phrase where you can say something and you feel fabulous afterwards? You're not shaming somebody else, you're not being mean to somebody else, but it's like, no touchy. Like, nope, that's not my thing. Or it's like, do like an electric slide, like slide back. Find out your thing where it's like, that can be your ownership. And if somebody's like, what are you doing? It's like, what are you doing? Stare them down and they're kind of like, whatever. Find something that gives them ownership and invite them into that conversation. We go into a lot more practical, helpful steps in the Protect Our Youth workshop for parents, and then Power Predators. It's 5 lessons. We can go into classrooms for each lesson is about the time frame of the classroom, but we have really helpful phrases in each of those programs too, so that can be useful for teachers too.
Is there a cost to that?
Nope, it's free. Well, for the Power Predators, for speaker requests, we do our very best to keep those free. For Protect Our Youth workshop, it's $10 if you register online, $20 at the door, and that's just to help cover the cost for the event. So that one is, our goal eventually will be to be able to have all of our presentations for free. Small nonprofit reality, we're hoping to get there. So if anybody wants to partner and sponsor an event too, where it's like, I'll cover the cost for that event, that helps make it accessible for everybody like this is tonight.
Any last minute questions?
We have one in the back.
Okay.
Last one of the night.
Ann.
You mentioned at the beginning, as I understood, that you were going to that you have things at events. We're having a fall festival. Are you going to be having a booth there?
For which fair?
Our fall festival that's in Avery?
No, we haven't yet. We are just expanding. So our office is located in Woodbury, Minnesota. So we started with Woodbury Days, we've expanded to Cottage Grove and Oakdale, and we are hoping to bridge our way out. But if somebody wants us, let us know that it exists. Part of it too is just covering the cost of different booths and events. So if we ever get a sponsor that's like, hey, you show up, we'll cover the table, we've got it all set up, will you be there? We will 100% find a way to make that happen. But as of right now, we haven't explored it, but I would love to learn more, because if this is something that the community here wants more of, we want to be here for you.
Also, this will be up on Facebook at both parishes, St. Joe's and Lady Lakes. Please do me a favor, share this as much as you can. That's a big part of getting out. The big thing is education. I look around, there's a lot of older people, which is great, but you can have an impact by sharing this, telling your kids and grandkids, hey, I think you may want to take a peek at this. So, okay? That it?
Thank you all for your time.
And if you're in the back, John and Ruth and Ashley will be around and say hello.
Thank you.